Also the first chapter, or part of the first chapter. Thank you, Brian.
He's here too?
We'll put that on the blooper reel. Chapter 1. Leo Townsend clenched the flowers in his hand when he spotted his father hunched over a grave a dozen yards away. He had hoped he wouldn't see Frank Townsend until the funeral lunch, when the house would be full of mourners and avoiding him would be easy. But more than that, Leo had wanted to be alone to say goodbye. He smoothed his rumpled black suit and forced himself to walk on the gravel path past the crumbling, century-old headstones to the newer section of Merritt's Landing Cemetery, where the crosses gleamed white in the early afternoon sun and plastic flowers stood sentry. When he stepped onto the grass, still damp from earlier rains, water beaded on his Italian loafers. He didn't bother to wipe them off. He didn't care if the moisture ruined the handcrafted leather. His mother would have been horrified, if she were alive. Leo slowed as he approached his father. Frank stood alone by the mound of fresh dirt, staring vacantly at the Isabella Renata Salvatore Townsend funeral program in his hand. Frank's 6-foot frame seemed to have shrunk from grief. The sleeves of his borrowed black suit covered his hands. The pants were too long, the cuffs, like Leo's shoes, damp. When Frank noticed Leo, his vacant eyes filled with rage. "You walked out of the funeral." Lines etched his forehead, and his jaw clenched. "You didn't attend the graveside service. How dare you dishonor your mother?" Tears in his eyes magnified his grief. Leo knew that no matter what he said, his father wouldn't hear him. So he studied the grave, trying hard not to think of his mother buried under 6 feet of dirt. "You couldn't be bothered with the funeral arrangements, attending the wake," Frank continued. The yellow narcissus and white crocuses trembled in Leo's hand. He'd wanted red poppies to complete the bouquet, but the florist near O'Hare didn't carry them, so she tied a red ribbon around the flowers instead. At this time of year, crocuses, narcissus, and poppies carpeted the gentle slopes of the Castelluccio di Norcia near his mother's Italian hometown of Norcia. She had wanted to take her children there, treat them to prosciutto di Norcia, black truffles, and lentil soup, attend Mass with them at the Basilica del Santo Veneto, and run with them through the plain when it exploded in color. But that never happened, because the farm kept the Townsends shackled to Endeavor, Wisconsin. Isabella had hoped, once she and Frank retired, to take their grandchildren to Italy. But there was no retirement, and there were no grandchildren. None of Leo's relationships had lasted long enough, and Leo's brother Eddie would never be able to father a child. Now it was too late. That morning, Isabella had been buried in the cemetery 5 miles from the farm. "When you finally showed your face at church," Frank said, "you didn't even stick around to pay your respects." Leo glanced up at the cloudless sky. "Sei la stella del mio cielo," his mother always told him. "You are the star of my sky." Sighing, he bent to place the bouquet on Isabella's grave. The bow fell off. He collected it, wiping bits of dirt off the satin. He hated leaving her here. Throat burning, tears welling, he shoved the ribbon in his jacket pocket, whispered, "Sei la stella del mio cielo," and started for his car. He'd be damned if he cried in front of his father. "Explain yourself! Stop running away from your responsibilities." Leo hesitated. He traced his finger over the scar on his chin that cut a smooth path through his habitual stubble. The 2-year-old scar was a souvenir from the Chicago Triathlon mob stampede that had paralyzed Eddie from the waist down and left him in a wheelchair. Leo had fought the mob to get to his brother, but had been unable to reach him, protect him. Frank couldn't forgive Leo for that. Hell, Leo couldn't even forgive himself. A robin sang from its perch on the marble curl of a cherub on a nearby headstone. The red-breasted birds had been Isabella's favorite. Leo finally turned to the man he'd so deeply disappointed. The wrinkled skin on Frank's face and neck was red and blotchy, in stark contrast to his starched ivory collar. The ring of white hair circling Frank's scalp glistened with sweat in the late morning sun. When did he get so old? Dad, we've been over this. I worked in San Francisco on assignment Monday and Tuesday. I couldn't get here until today. You breeze in from writing some asinine story about fag rights barely in time for the funeral, and then leave in the middle of the service. Frank shook the program at Leo. What the hell is wrong with you? I couldn't sit through a Catholic Mass. I know that's what Mom wanted, but it doesn't mean I have to listen to it. You refuse to honor her memory. Leo moved to within an arm's length of his father and studied the old man's watery, bloodshot eyes. No whiskey fumes, just Old Spice aftershave, mothballs, and sorrow. Sitting in a dark, dank church, while an apathetic priest rambles on about sin and afterlife, doesn't honor Mom's memory. Becoming the successful, decent, honest man she raised me to be does. Frank's face softened for an instant, and then he turned his back on Leo and marched down the hill to the waiting sedan.